Combathletes all over the world, welcome. If you're watching this on YouTube, click subscribe because you're in the right place for some game-changing strength and conditioning knowledge and information that's going to help you with your combat sports performance. And if you're joining us on the Skool community, Combathletes Worldwide, congratulations. You've officially joined the best combat sports community in the world. My name is Coach Harry, and it's my job to help amateur and professional combat sports athletes all over the world train pain-free, build strength, and weaponize their gas tanks without spending endless hours in the weight room. Make sure that you follow Combathlete on Instagram at Combathlete Arena. And today's talk that we're going to get stuck into, which is really going to help you guys, today's course is about how to weaponize your gas tank. Okay, so energy systems development made as simple as possible. Here's a chap who knows a thing or two about energy systems, fantastic cardio, Mr. Marab. Often energy systems is quite a confusing topic for people. The reason I've made this course is because lots of you have requested in the Combathletes Worldwide School group that you get some more knowledge and understanding and some help with how to weaponize your gas tank. So we're going to look at that today, all the things you need to know regarding conditioning, basically. So here's what we're going to go through. We're going to look at resting heart rate. What is it? How do you measure it? Okay, what are the three main energy systems and why do you need to know about each one and how to develop each one for your training, for your conditioning, and then how to train them and some practical examples that you can use, as well as some programs for you guys to have a go and take yourself through to get some really good results. Let's start with resting heart rate then. Okay, why is this important and how do you measure it? So in previous videos, we've talked about the importance of resting heart rate and how to measure it. Let's just go through it again quickly. The best way to do it, if you're on a budget, is when you wake up in the morning, first thing, turn your alarm off on your phone or however you wake up in the morning. Before you get out of bed, okay, get to the stopwatch on your phone, press go, okay, and time 10 seconds and count the number of beats that you get measured with your first two fingers, find your pulse, and measure the number of beats that you get for 10 seconds. Multiply that answer by 6 to get beats per minute, and then do that whole process 3 times and take an average of the 3 results. You'll get a pretty good reading of what your resting heart rate is in that kind of analog fashion. It's pretty low tech, but it works okay. And doing that every day of the week will give you some really good results to see what your average resting heart rate is. So you can do that across 7 days, take an average of those 7 results, and then you've got some pretty good data there. Okay, so that's how you measure it. And all my athletes do this. They do this on a daily basis. Now, there are wearables and apps that can help you do this as well, but sometimes they cost a bit more money. So the process I just described is free, basically, and you can do it. My athletes do it. It gives us some really, really good data. Now, a key question regarding your resting heart rate, is it over 60 beats per minute or under? Now, the reason 60 BPM is an important figure is because we want to try and get your resting heart rate to sub 60 BPM. Why? Because a lower resting heart rate means that your heart is more efficient. That's basically what we're looking for. We want efficiency in your cardiovascular system, and we want your heart working in an efficient manner so that when we do other work later on down the line, it sticks better. If you have a high resting heart rate, it's difficult to get other results from other conditioning methods. Okay, 3 energy systems then. What are we looking at? We've got an aerobic energy system. We're going to go into what that means. That's one of the main 3. We've got the anaerobic lactic system. Okay, we're going to talk about more kind of what these words mean without kind of going too crazy into the science. I don't want to bore you with that. I just want to give you what you need to know. And then the anaerobic alactic. Okay, this letter here is also super important. So those are the 3 main energy systems we're looking at. Now, it's important to understand that all of these energy systems work together in different ratios. And a good way to think of that is if you think of like a mixing desk or a soundboard where you've got different channels, okay? Each channel here, this could be the aerobic channel, this could be the anaerobic lactic, and this could be the anaerobic alactic. Depending on what activity you're doing at what intensity, okay, what difficulty and what duration, how long are you doing it, is going to dictate which one of the energy systems, which one of the 3 is the predominant one, is doing most of the work. But you must understand that you can't isolate any of them. It's just that they do work in different ratios, okay, because they're all inside your body, they're all working. It's just who's working the hardest depending on what task you're doing. So let's dive into them a little bit then. So what is the aerobic system? All you really need to know is that it's fueled by fat. So fats in your diet will fuel your aerobic system. And the aerobic system, the clue is kind of in the word aero, it needs oxygen. Okay, it needs oxygen in order to use the fat to fuel it. Okay, simple as that. What is the anaerobic lactic system then? Now this one is fueled by glycogen, and glycogen is just really stored carbohydrates. So the carbs you have in your diet, your body stores them, and then when you do work that requires the anaerobic lactic system to be the dominant one, it's going to use that glycogen as fuel for the work ahead. And then we've got the anaerobic alactic system. Now this is fueled by ATP, which I think from my studies years ago is adenine triphosphate is the kind of long term or the long jargony word. All you need to know is that ATP pretty much fuels the alactic system, and we're going to go into more of what these systems break down to be. Now, the aerobic system is fueled by fat, so the kind of work that we do when the aerobic system is the most dominant player is longer duration work, very often 20 to 90 minutes plus of work. Okay, long duration stuff. The anaerobic lactic system, because it's fueled by glycogen, it's somewhere around the 20 seconds to 4 minutes worth of work. Okay, so the intensity is quite high. The body needs to break down that glycogen quickly that's been stored from the carbs and use it for energy to get the job done. That's what this energy system, the anaerobic lactic, does. And then the anaerobic alactic system is fueled by ATP, which is a really quick way of getting energy. It breaks the ATP down and uses it for energy so that you can get 5 to 20 seconds of work done. And usually, as we'll go into in a minute, it's at quite high intensity. So let's have a look at the aerobic energy system. This, when often, like I've been chatting with my mentor, Coach Johnny Reynolds, shout out to Johnny, he's helped me a lot with simplifying this kind of stuff because it can often be, really complicated, even for coaches, let alone athletes. But he was talking about how often when MMA athletes are tested in a laboratory setting, the aerobic energy system actually is the system that needs the most work with MMA fighters. MMA fighters are often very good at the high intensity stuff. They're not very good at the low intensity stuff. They're not very efficient. So what is the aerobic energy system? Often we're in the heart rate zones 1 and 2, which usually is somewhere around 110 to 150 beats per minute. And we could kind of define this type of work, this style of work, as low intensity work. Okay. Now it has to be low intensity in order for us to do 20 to 90 minutes of it, sometimes even more than that. It's really hard to do high intensity stuff for a long period of time, but we can do low intensity stuff for longer periods of time. So here's a readout of one of my athletes who completed a zone 2 session, an aerobic base session, or sometimes we call it steady state. Okay, he completed this on the assault bike, and you can see out of all the colors here on the chart, the blue zone 2 area is where he spent most of his time. 57 minutes, in fact, looking at that. It was a 60-minute session, and that's where he spent all his time. Here you can see on the heart rate readout, he's anywhere from between 113 and 132 beats per minute, perfectly sat in his zone 2. So that's an example of what zone 2 work looks like. Here's the scale of heart rates that he could have been in, and you can see it's low intensity on that scale. Why would we do aerobic work, steady state work? The reason we do it is because it improves the efficiency of the process of oxygen being delivered to your working muscles, and it builds your aerobic base. Okay. Earlier we were talking about lower resting heart rate means a more efficient system. The aerobic energy work, or the aerobic energy systems work, the base building work, helps build that efficiency. So if your resting heart rate is over 60 BPM, let's say you've done a week's worth of measurements and it's over 60 BPM every single day of the week, what should you do? I recommend that you run our base program for 8 weeks first. Okay, this will help get that resting heart rate hopefully below 60. We've used it with hundreds of athletes, and that seems to be the case for most of them. It's obviously a case-by-case basis. You can't just say it's going to help everybody, but for most people, if your resting heart rate's kind of 63, 65, 67 BPM, this is going to help you get sub 60. And there'll be a link to this inside the Skool group, Combathletes Worldwide, where you can download this for free and get to work and start running it. Like I said earlier, a better aerobic base means that you'll get better results with other conditioning work. Okay, if we start you on more complicated stuff, your lactic, your alactic stuff, and you don't have a good aerobic base, you're not actually going to get very good results from that work. So we want the aerobic base in place first as the foundation. And once we have that, it means you're going to have better recovery between your sets in the weight room when you're moving from set to set. Between your sessions, so between your skill sessions, you'll recover faster. Between your weight room sessions, you'll recover faster. And then just your days of training, you're going to be recovering quicker. Why? Because the system is more efficient at recovering. Now, here's some good heuristics. You might want to write these down as it relates to your sparring weeks, okay? And thanks to Johnny for helping me with this. So if you have a light sparring week, whatever that means to you with your workload. So remember, guys, we've talked a little bit about tracking workloads and structuring your training years and your weeks in previous course videos. You can access them in the Skool group as well. A light sparring week, one aerobic session is fine. One steady state session is fine. But if you have a heavy sparring week, you're probably going to want to do 2 aerobic sessions. Okay? It's going to help you recover between your sparring sessions. Okay? So important to jot that down as it relates to your training weeks. Okay, next one. Anaerobic lactic then. Let's dive into that. So this is a little bit higher intensity. Often we see athletes getting into zone 4 and zone 5 with their heart rates. What does that mean? 160 to 180 beats plus per minute. And it's high intensity work. This is much, much harder. The durations of work vary from 20 seconds up to kind of 4 minutes. They vary on how we program it, depending on what we're trying to achieve with our athletes. But again, here's a readout from another one of my athletes here. And you can see the yellow zone 4 is where the athlete spent a vast proportion of their time. Okay. On the readout, you can see their heart rate goes all the way above 150, recovering up towards the 165s, recovering, and then up there again. Okay. And in this specific example, this was 2 minutes on and then 2 minutes easy. And that's what these curves are representing here. The lactic system, it breaks down glycogen, or what we call the kind of stored carbohydrates, and it does it quite quickly. But what happens is lactate builds up as a result. Now, lots of people kind of from the 80s contemporary training world that has somewhat bled through to today call it lactic acid. Oh, I got lactic acid in my muscles. It's not lactic acid, okay? It's lactate, the dirty burn that is building up. What's cool about training in this format and training the lactic energy system is as you get efficient, right? Let's say you've got your heart rate down to sub 60 BPM, 55 resting heart rate. Okay, your aerobic base system is efficient. When you train the lactic system, your body will produce the lactate, but it would also use it as fuel to keep going, which when you're doing, 3 or 5-minute rounds, for example, in MMA, that's a huge advantage to weaponize, to be able to push the pace on your opponent. Okay, so you can use that lactate, that byproduct from breaking down the glycogen as fuel, which is really, really cool that the body can do that. So often when we program lactic work, it's high intensity intervals. I'm sure you've heard of interval training. That's where we use this, okay? Now you might want to jot this down, another useful heuristic as it relates to your sparring weeks. If you have a heavy sparring week, you're only going to want to do one of these lactic sessions in that 7-day week. If you have a light sparring week, you can get away with 2. Why? Remember guys, lactic training, high intensity intervals, it takes longer to recover from. Okay, so if you're already sparring hard, you don't need to do much lactic work. How long does it take to recover from? It varies, but at least 48 hours, guys, when you do high intensity interval work. It takes a while for that energy system to really kind of recuperate and regenerate. So you definitely don't want to be doing this stuff, every day. You'll absolutely fry yourself and you'll cook yourself out. Okay, so it does take a long time to recover from. The clue is in the name. The high intensity work. So make sure you space, if you're doing 2 lactic sessions across a week, because your sparring load is light, you're spacing it sensibly. Okay, don't be doing these sessions back to back, day after day. Here's some examples of sessions that we program at Combathlete all the time. 2 minutes on at 90% of the maximum heart rate of the athlete. 2 minutes off, and by off we usually mean pedaling lightly or going easier, and we'll do anywhere from 6 to 8 rounds of that. Another variation we do, 3 minutes 30 seconds on at 95% of your maximum aerobic speed, which is a metric we use with our athletes in order to really follow some precise numbers. 2 minutes off, and again that means off by pedaling lightly. We'll do 6 rounds, rest 6 minutes so that we feel somewhat recuperated but not quite, and then we'll do another 3 rounds. And we use many different structures for conditioning sessions, but these are just some that work really, really well with our athletes. Okay, let's get into the alactic energy system then. So this is high intensity as well, but this is really short duration. This is kind of your really short, high intensity sprints is a really good way of thinking of it. Usually it falls into the 5 to 20 seconds worth of work, which is really kind of as hard as you can go, balls to the wall for the most part. Now, what's cool about the alactic system is it generates fuel really, really quickly by breaking down ATP. But the caveat to that is the fuel runs out really quickly as well. Okay, it's just like a real fast, supercar. It can burn it, but if you've ever gone fast in a supercar or fast on a motorbike like me, you can literally watch the fuel gauge go down. And it's a bit like that with your alactic energy system. Short sprints, and the way we train this energy system is with what we call repeated efforts. So we'll usually set something up for the athlete to repeat each time is high intensity. Now, again, useful heuristic depending on your sparring week. If you've got a heavy sparring week, 2 alactic sessions is decent. Okay, you can get away with doing 2 in a heavy week. If you have a light sparring week, you might want to do, 2 to 3 alactic sessions. Because remember, guys, these energy systems are not isolated. So when you're sparring, you're going to be using a mixture of all of them. Okay, 2 to 3 on a lighter sparring week. Now, the high intensity, short duration, it also takes a long time to recover from. Not quite as long as the lactic work, because you've got to remember the work is only 5 to 20 seconds long, okay, each work period. But you still want to give yourself around 24 to 36 hours of recovery time after you do some alactic conditioning work. Okay, here's some examples. We program this all the time. 5 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 15 rounds. We can do anywhere from 12 to 24 rounds on these kind of intervals or these repeats. 9 seconds on, 45 seconds off is another format that we use, 12 rounds. So a couple of examples there on how we use it. Now, some useful work to rest ratios. If you want to build your own conditioning programs, you have to understand how much work should you do and then how much should you rest, depending on which energy system you want to work on. So if you want to do the alactic work, which is really short duration, like we said, 5 to 20 seconds, you need to be doing 5 to 20 seconds of work, but then anywhere from 12 to 20 times in terms of rest. Okay, so the work to rest ratio would be 1 to 12 all the way up to 1 to 20. Much longer rests than the period of work that you're doing for alactic. Now for lactic work, you can see the ratio is much different. Okay, anywhere from 20 to 240 seconds on, and then anywhere from 3 to 5 times that for your rest. And then for your aerobic work, 1 to 1 to 1 to 3. Okay, so aerobic work can be, anywhere from 3 minutes over, like we said, sometimes 20 minutes to 90 minutes, 1 to 1 to 1 to 3 on the aerobic. So those work to rest ratios will just help you with a bit of a guideline. Now, if you want some free programs, make sure you check out our base program. If your heart rate is over 60 BPM, do it for 6 weeks. I can't spell your either. So if you're over 60 BPM, do the base program for 8 weeks and watch your resting heart rate come down towards the end of those 8 weeks. If you are under 60 BPM, then you can choose, week 7 or week 8 or wherever you want really off the base program, 20 to 45 minutes of steady state work, and do that 1 to 2 times per week as per the sparring guidelines mentioned just now. We've also got a 30-day gas tank weaponization program inside the Skool group, which you can run for free. It's really good for off-season. It's a 3 days per week program. You can fit it around your training as best as possible, but just make sure you're doing it after a lifting session in the weight room or after your skills sessions. And also make sure that you're leaving one day at least in between those conditioning sessions. Like I said, there's recovery times you have to think about. Don't do this 3 days in a row, for example. It's not a good recipe. Okay, make sure you're giving yourself some time. Make sure then you join the Skool group if you haven't already, Combathletes Worldwide. It's my job to help as many athletes all over the world that I can. And I really want to do that because there's so much crap information out there. So check it out on Skool, click join. And as a kind of thank you and as a helping hand for joining the Skool group, you get to book a free performance call with me. It's going to be a short conversation where we'll talk about your training. And I do believe a decent coach can help influence and change the trajectory of an athlete's future and their training just with a phone call. So you get a free performance call with me, and you can find out how to book that when you join the Skool community. Make sure then as well you follow Combathlete Arena on Instagram. Subscribe here to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. My name's Coach Harry. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.